Yeah, it was always a pleasure and an honor to be part of this discussions, mainly the treaty. Well, Anishinaabe name is Little Bear Macons. As you all know, the signer of the 1850 treaty was Mishimko, the Great Bear, which is I'm a direct descendant of that chief back in 1850. And, so it's always an honor for me to be part of any discussion regarding treaty. So ang ganda mga bigi, baka naman ako masyomes, constitution na kas, say mga pogan git mo nak, nanagdoob mission, nanagdoob ang danoy mga nak, which kink mo, kawid ba mo wala nung hindi siya mang Anishinaabe bumatuzuin. Muna kaya Anishinaabe king siya damang Anish Mwamdamin Anishinaabe panegi omdan Miikan chkang we ake wap nang shaw nang gabi nang kilid nang masyom sananik. Nanagdoob mishnam huwin tagigitiang huwin dagagitiang tadbesen mas ngit medyo madzanan mishomes ke nanagduen mangonongom mishomes chimiwach. Thank you. Have a good meeting, guys. Thank you.
We good, Elder Jean. Thank you so much. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rhonda Coster, who will be bringing some words on behalf of our provost, Dr. Barnett. Dr. Coster serves as both deputy provost and the vice provost of teaching and learning. So she's quite involved in the work that happens here at Lakehead University directly concerning students. So welcome, Dr. Coster.
Thanks very much, Denise. It's my pleasure to be able to be here today. And although David definitely sends his regrets as our provost, I'm happy to be able to be here in his place. So bonjour, wache, anen, and welcome to the opening event of Treaty Week for 2022. I'd like to thank Elder Jean for opening this week of learning in a good way for all of us, and certainly extend a welcome to Chief Williams and to to Chief Williams of Chippewa of Rama First Nations, and to Michelle Solomon as our counselor from Fort William First Nation. And of course, also to our keynote speaker, Tracey O'Donnell. It's lovely to have all of you here joining us on this special occasion. So as many of you will probably already know, in 2016, Ontario passed legislation declaring the first week of November as Treaties Recognition Week. And Lakehead University honors the importance of treaties and helps students and residents learn more about treaty rights and relationships. By learning more about our collective treaty rights and obligations, we can create greater understanding and nurture these relationships. Treaties are legally binding agreements that set out the rights, the responsibilities, and relationships of First Nations and the federal and provincial governments. They form the basis of the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And although many treaties were signed more than a century ago, treaty commitments are just as valid today as they were then. And many of you again might know this. To me, this was a very interesting fact. Ontario was covered by 46 treaties and other agreements. So Lakehead remains committed to reconciliation through the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. And these calls are addressed through several means. This week allows us to focus on 3 calls to action. So I'm just going to go over those 3 that we are most concerned with at the moment. Number 28, we call upon law schools in Canada to require all law students to take a course in Aboriginal people in the law, which includes the history and legacy of residential schools, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties and Aboriginal rights, Indigenous law, and Aboriginal Crown relations. We are also focusing on number 57, where we call upon the federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal governments to provide education to public servants on the history of Aboriginal peoples, including the history and legacy of residential schools, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties and Aboriginal rights, Indigenous law, and Aboriginal and Crown relations. And finally, call to action number 62. We call upon the federal, provincial, and territorial governments in consultation and collaboration with survivors, Aboriginal peoples, and educators to do two things. One, make age-appropriate curriculum on residential schools, treaties, and Aboriginal peoples' historical and contemporary contributions to Canada, and that this needs to be a mandatory education requirement for kindergarten to grade 12 students. And secondly, to provide the necessary funding to post-secondary institutions to educate teachers on how to integrate Indigenous knowledge and teaching methods into the classrooms. Lakehead University has a week of events designed to deepen our understanding on all of these issues and of the importance of treaty, our relationship to these, the history and current and future implications. And of course, we get to begin today with Tracey O'Donnell to help us in our understanding and journey. We are really honored that all of you have joined us today on this opening for this special week, and I encourage you to join the other events that are happening throughout the week. Miigwech, Marcy, and thank you.
Miigwech, thank you so much, Dr. Coster. It is now my pleasure to introduce Chief Ted Williams of the Chippewa-Rama First Nation. Chief Williams is of the Fish Clan and Ojibwe from the Chippewa-Rama First Nation, proud husband of 42 years and father of 2. From humble beginnings, Ted's early aspirations to make a difference led him to become a council member at the age of 25, and 2 years later became the youngest elected chief of the Chippewa-Rama First Nation. And I will say more than a few decades later, he is back in that role as chief of his community, and it's always a pleasure to have him join us. He held a successful career in real estate and chaired the successful development of Casino Rama. Upon opening, he climbed the corporate ladder to become Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Human Resources at Casino Rama. Chief Williams has been an entrepreneur for over 13 years as a consultant, guest speaker, and what I like to see are the skilled chainsaw artists whose popular wooden bears can be found across the region. More recently, he made his turn back into politics as a councillor for Rama First Nation, during which he sat on various committees, including the Ontario Parole Board. And now the chief of Rama First Nation, Ted brings his wealth of experience in many areas to his role as serving his community. So always a pleasure to have you here today, even if it is virtual for us, but I would like to extend my deepest and warmest welcome, Chief Williams.
Bonjour, flattery will get you everywhere.
All true.
Bonjour, Gima Ted Williams, Indigenous Cast Ram and Jickening Donjaba. I'd like to acknowledge Elder Jean Naugijik. And I think Elder Jean and I, we go back maybe 30, almost 40 years. I remember seeing Jean, he may have been working in the NADAP program at the time. Anyway, Miigwech, Elder Jean, for your opening prayer today, and I'd like to acknowledge as well our speaker today, Tracey O'Donnell. Tracey has been in the field of working in the Indigenous community and in a legal capacity and with the Anishinabek Nation for a number of years, and I can attest to the great work that she has done over the course of her involvement and her career. And I'd like to acknowledge Lakehead, Miigwech to Lakehead University and their commitment to learning and their commitment to Fort William First Nation. And it's good to see Councillor Solomon. You've got some big shoes to fill there with the absence of former chief, and he's gone on to Peter Collins gone on to other things, but you know what, he's left his mark, I'm sure. And so anyway, acknowledge Lakehead and their commitment to both Fort William and to the Chippewa-Rama First Nation, and plus the surrounding Indigenous communities as well. As was stated, Ontario is basically a place where many treaties have covered the land. In Ontario, obviously today would not exist without treaties. And as was indicated earlier, the treaties, they form the basis for the relationships between the Indigenous community, in our case, First Nations, and the non-Indigenous peoples. And they're important. So having said that, it's been said different times in different ways, but we're all treaty people. And but we don't all understand, and we're not all exposed to this fact. And so that's why I'm happy that Lakehead is doing their part in bringing this opportunity for knowledge and learning to the virtual world, at least. And I'm sure that there's many things going on at the campuses. Having said all of that, welcome. Welcome to you all to our traditional territories and the traditional treaty territories of which is called the province of Ontario. And I wish you all a great day, week, month, and miigwech Tracey for leading the charge today. And I do have to say, I'm going to have to sign off. I've got counsel today, and but it's always good to be in the company of friends, colleagues, and miigwech to Lakehead once again.
Miigwech so much. It was so great to see you. And good afternoon to your chief and council as well. So now we get to invite Michelle Solomon, who I can't see on my screen here, but I know she's here. There she is. Hi, Michelle. It's now my pleasure to introduce Councillor Michelle Solomon, who is a member and an elected councillor for Fort William First Nation. She is a proud mother and grandmother. Michelle earned her BA in Indigenous Learning at Lakehead University and a social worker service diploma at Confederation College. One of her many roles as councillor is to provide guidance and knowledge towards a substantial portfolio area for the First Nation, which includes health and community services, finance and youth, and social development. Michelle currently works as a community development manager for the Ontario Native Women's Association. In her role as community development manager, Michelle leads programs focused on Indigenous women's leadership. Michelle also served on the ONWA Board of Directors from 1988 to 1993. So we'd like to welcome Michelle.
Good afternoon, Ani Boju, Oshki Mekana Ikwe, Dejnakaz, and Manado Gishigo Queensans Dejnakaz. I've been gifted with these two beautiful names that I get to carry in my life and share with all of you. And what they mean is New Path Woman and Little Girl Spirit in the Sky. I just want to say hello to all of you, and I want to acknowledge, the amazing people that are gathered here to share their knowledge, and bring greetings as well. Chief Williams and Tracey O'Donnell, I know that you have a wealth of knowledge and information that you will impart on us today, and I'm really thankful for that. I'm really grateful that Treaty Recognition Week is available to people, available not just to non-Indigenous people, but to Indigenous people as well, because we're not always all well versed in this history and this information and this knowledge, and it's so important that we are all learning, as anytime we have the opportunity to learn more about this relationship that we have with each other, and but also the relationship that Indigenous people have with land as well, because that is also part of treaty. So I think that this is just such a wonderful opportunity for all of us. And I'm really grateful that Lakehead University, particularly the Indigenous Services Department, brings so much wonderful knowledge and information, provides so many opportunities to people to learn. And, that we are, the pandemic caused us to do this virtually, but it's also been such an opportunity, that we can be in the room with so many people from so far away, so we can, from all over the place, listen to Tracey today, bring this amazing knowledge and information. So I'm so grateful and thankful for that. And I just want to acknowledge all the people who are taking the time today to come and listen and learn, and be here with an open heart and an open mind, and we will all take something away from this hour of discussion. So and I just want to say one more thing, and that is to acknowledge that it's International Inuit Day today, and so I think it's important that I give voice to that while I have the moment to do so. So without further delay, I would like to, I'm coming from Fort William First Nation territory today, and for all of you who are, welcome to the traditional territory of Fort William First Nation, and it's a pleasure to be here. Miigwech.
Miigwech, thank you very much, Michelle. And yes, to echo, I did notice today that it was National Inuit Day, and I know we will have friends all across the country all celebrating and recognizing that as well today. So thank you for that, and also the reminder. We are now going to move to our guest keynote speaker for today. So it is my pleasure to introduce Tracey O'Donnell, Marie Elena O'Donnell, but she goes by Tracey. Tracey is actually from our region here in the north. She's a member of Red Rock Indian Band. She has practiced law in Ontario for over 27 years, and her practice is focused entirely on providing legal services to First Nations, their members, and their organizations, both on and off reserve. Tracey supported the Anishinabek First Nations in negotiation and ratification of the Anishinabek Nation Education Agreement, the largest self-government in Canada due to the number of First Nations that signed the agreement, and the first self-government agreement in Ontario. Tracey is currently working with the Anishinabek First Nations on the implementation of the Anishinabek Nation Child Wellbeing Law and the establishment of the Anishinabek Child Wellbeing System established by First Nations under their inherent jurisdiction. She was also part of the Anishinabek negotiations team, supporting the tripartite self-government agreement among the Anishinabek First Nations, the Government of Canada, and the Province of Ontario. She argued on behalf of the Native Women's Association of Canada and LEAF in the first Indian residential school case that reached the Supreme Court of Canada, Blackwater versus Plint. Tracey was an elected bencher of the Law Society of Ontario, formerly the Law Society of Upper Canada, from 2003 to 2007, the first Aboriginal woman elected since the Law Society was founded in 1797. Tracey has volunteered on a variety of community-based committees and boards of directors. Tracey earned her honors BA in political science from Laurentian University in Sudbury and her LLB JD from Osgoode Hall Law School, York University in Toronto. Tracey is the proud mother of 3 children, aged 15, 18, and 22. Tracey, you have broken a lot of barriers and really led the charge. And I think we have some law students in the audience today. So we really are looking forward to learning alongside you today. So welcome, Tracey.
Oh, miigwech. I want to say miigwech first to Elder Jean Nawagishek for the opening, for the warm welcome from Michelle Solomon, counselor at Fort William First Nation, and from Chief Williams from Chippewas of Rama First Nation. It really is an honor for me to be here to join you virtually on this event. Today actually marks the 7th annual Treaties Recognition Week. And this is an important week. It's important because we need to learn more about treaties, and we need to do our learning together. So miigwech to Lakehead University for hosting this virtual event. So this week is one of many steps on the path to reconciliation. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that learning more and knowing more about the treaties that exist is for the benefit of all. Treaties are agreements that were based on mutual respect. For Indigenous peoples, treaties are a sacred and a solemn agreement, more than just a standard contract that you would sign. It's a recognition of the nation-to-nation relationship, and it's a recognition of the place of the First Peoples here on this territory. Treaties are legally binding. Treaties are constitutionally protected. They're protected under Section 35 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Treaties, as we've heard, do set out rights and responsibilities of First Nations and the Crown. And nowadays, the Crown is represented by the governments of Canada and the Government of Ontario. As we've heard, there are 46 treaties and land agreements here in the province of Ontario. We have 3 numbered treaties, 2 Robinson-Huron treaties that were signed in 1850, 2 Williams treaties that were signed in 1923, and 30 Upper Canada treaties. These treaties primarily set out rules for land use, sharing of resources, and relationships. What's important to note is not only what's covered in the treaties, but also what's not covered or addressed in the treaties. And so today I want to focus on the work that I've been doing with the Anishinaabe Nation to exercise our inherent jurisdiction and to advance our relationship through treaties and through other means. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen here just to give a picture of the Anishinaabe Nation so you can understand the territory that I'm talking about. So you should be able to see on your screen now the Anishinaabe Nation territory. You can see Fort William First Nation is a member of Anishinaabe Nation, and the territory runs here in the Northern Superior region through Lake Huron region, over to the Southeast region with Algonquins of Pikwakanagan, who are in the process of finalizing their treaty with the Government of Canada, down to Aamjiwnaang First Nation near Sarnia. So the territory of the Anishinaabe Nation includes 39 First Nations that are a member of a number of treaties, both the 1850s treaties, the Williams treaties, and some of the Upper Canada treaties down here in the southern region. The Anishinaabe Nation itself is comprised of over 65,000 members, with the majority of our people living off the reserve territory. And the Anishinaabe Nation has always been mindful of treaties in our relationships. I'm going to try and move to the next slide here. And so the Anishinaabe Nation started on a journey to exercise our rights and our authorities. I'm going to share with you a short story about this journey before I continue on. So one of the treaties that Indigenous peoples are party to is called the Jay Treaty. And the Jay Treaty is a pre-Confederation treaty that recognized that Indigenous peoples didn't have the same boundaries as the settler governments, so that Indigenous peoples could travel across the American and Canadian border and bring goods and peoples, move back and forth without having to adhere to those laws of the respective governments. The Jay Treaty currently is recognized by the government of the United States of America, but not so much recognized by the government of Canada. And so the Anishinaabe have what we call the Jay Treaty Days. And I'm going to talk about one particular event. So the Anishinaabe were planning to go across from the Sault Ste. Marie Canada side over to the Sault Ste. Marie America side. And they would bring goods back with them and declare them duty-free as Indigenous peoples. And this one time, usually we drive over the bridge between Sault, Michigan and Sault, Ontario, and you get a convoy of cars, the government officials are notified, and all this happens. But this one year, the Anishinaabe Nation decided, we're going to get a big cargo canoe and we're going to go across the water on a canoe. And we're going to take this trip with this big canoe, and then we'll come back with our canoe loaded up. And so what happened though was no one had a big canoe in the area. So they said, we need to borrow a big canoe. So they found a non-Indigenous man, he was local, who had one of these big cargo canoes. He said, you can use my canoe for this, but I have to be in the canoe. I'm going to steer this canoe. And so Anishinaabe said, that's okay, you can steer the canoe. And so they had the plan set. Some Anishinaabe decided, I don't want to be in that canoe, but I'll paddle beside in my own canoe, or I'm going to bring my kayak. And so there were a lot of people then who were lining up, but not everyone in the same canoe, and that's okay too. And so in the morning, everyone gathers and gets ready to go across. The Sioux tribe of Chippewas was waiting on the other side, knowing that the Anishinaabe are coming across the water, the river, St. Mary's River. Doesn't a big fog roll in? Now you can't even see the other side of the river. It's impossible to see. All you can see is fog. And so they said, well, we know where the American side is. We just got to go straight across. We're good. So let's start paddling, and off they go. But the fog is so thick. And then all the policing agencies in the area know this is happening. And so a police boat comes by with lights flashing on, and the non-Indigenous one who is steering the canoe says, let's follow those lights. Let's follow the police. There was a mutiny in the canoe. Anishinaabe said, no, we're not going that way. So they took the van and said, you sit here, someone else is going to steer this canoe. But now with all this ruckus, everyone got turned around. They forgot now which way to go. So they're sitting there wondering, which way do we go? And they just sat there, and then they listened. And then they could hear a sound. They could hear a drum. And they could hear the drumming, and they listened harder to where that drum was coming from. It was the Anishinaabe on the other side of the river calling them in with the drum and singing. And so with that, they heard, and they realized this is the way to go. And so they paddled to the sound, and they did reach the other side. And I'm telling this story for a reason. As Anishinaabe, as we began our journey to exercising our inherent jurisdiction and to enforcing the treaties that we signed, we had to make that decision. And some people, some Anishinaabe decided to go together in the big canoe, and others said, no, we'll watch and see what happens. And that happens even now. Some of our 39 First Nations move forward in some initiatives, and some sit back and wait, but we're still one family. And when we had the non-Indigenous man steering the big canoe, where were we going? Along with the government, along with the police. Was that where we wanted to go? We wanted to go to the other side. And what called us in was our culture, our language, the drum, our people. And so that story is a true story that actually happened. But what it does is it really underlies the journey that Anishinaabe are on today in advancing our inherent right to jurisdiction. And so I'm showing you a pictograph here that was developed for these words. Nagodwa Anishinaabe, the Benjagan Gisan Anishinaabe na king, Gabidagwan, Godna, Minado Watsoen. Shkoda, Nebe, Akit, Nodin, Gabidagostanon, we knock the wind among Monk Pishkagmagon. The Majaged Yimi non Getchla Windagog, Anishinaabe, one of Donjin, Ninda, Nishwaswa Kinomadwanon. Sagedwin, Debwewin, Namadendmawin, Nabakawin, Nabatenzowin, Wekodzowin, Minawa Okadewin. Benjageki Minago na Dedwin where we knock the window in. Ha Namadende na Gabishwabak, Meanwhile Nongo Megwa Ishwabak, meanwhile Giabi one Ishwabak. And what that says in English is that we're one Anishinaabe family. Creator placed Anishinaabe on the earth along with the gift of spirituality. And that's the image that you see here. Here on Mother Earth, there are gifts given to Anishinaabe to look after: fire, water, earth, and wind. And that's recorded here in this pictograph. The Creator also gave Anishinaabe 7 sacred gifts to guide them. They are love, truth, respect, wisdom, humility, honesty, and bravery. That's here. Creator gave us sovereignty to govern ourselves. We respect and honor the past, the present, and the future. And these were the original instructions to Anishinaabe. This was written down for us and recorded for us through pictographs by Anishinaabe elders as a reminder to us of who we are as a people. And if we know this, if we know the Nagorwai and Anishinaabe, we know that our treaties are there not just to respect and honor the past, but they're there to respect and honor the past, the present, and the future. And we need to be mindful of that. When the treaties were negotiated, Anishinaabe already had these sacred gifts that governed what they did and the decisions they made. Those gifts of love, truth, respect, wisdom, humility, honesty, and bravery are recorded in those treaties that were signed. And so I wanted to share that with you to give some context to Anishinabek approach and what it is that we're doing. And so when the government looks at Aboriginal and treaty rights, the government says there is rights. We will recognize those rights. But Anishinaabe have a different approach. We believe that we have inherent jurisdiction that was given to us by Creator. That's what Nagorway Wanagas Anishinaabe says to us, that Creator put us here on the earth, and we have responsibilities to look after the fire, the water, the earth, and the wind. We have this jurisdiction to look after ourselves. And so for Anishinaabe, we've been negotiating for recognition of our rights through self-government negotiations. We have negotiations that have been advanced in the area of governance and education as a start. We have the Anishinaabe education system that was created through a self-government agreement with the Government of Canada that was then legislated into existence through federal legislation, and it's supported through a complementary agreement with the province of Ontario called the Master Education Agreement. And through the governance agreement, Anishinaabe jurisdiction over leadership selection, citizenship, culture and language, and the operation of government was recognized by the Government of Canada. And it was also legislated through federal enabling legislation. So we have sat down with the Government of Canada to negotiate for recognition of rights that were never ceded through any agreement or any treaty. We also exercise our inherent rights. So right now, the Anishinaabe put in place what we call Anishinaabe Child Wellbeing Law. We developed the law through the course of consultations with the Anishinaabe First Nations to say how traditionally and how do families and communities raise children up together. We didn't ask the question of what's wrong with the child welfare system. We know the wrongs, we know the harm that was done, but what we wanted to come back to is how did we traditionally look after our own? Because for all time, we've been taking care of each other. And so we developed the Anishinaabe Nation Child Wellbeing Law under First Nation jurisdiction, inherent jurisdiction, that authority the Creator gave to us to look after ourselves. And we started building up the Anishinaabe Child Wellbeing System. This work was done even before we went to the Government of Canada or the Government of Ontario to say we want to negotiate an agreement with you. We started implementing our law and setting up our system structures. And then once that process was well underway, we turned to Canada to say, now we need an agreement where you're going to recognize this jurisdiction that we're exercising. And so we've negotiated, we've exercised our jurisdiction, but we also had to resort to courts, and that's reality. You may have heard of, it's been in the news, the 1850 annuities claim. It was a claim advanced by the Anishinaabe First Nations through court to say that the Government of Canada and the province of Ontario have not lived up to their obligations under the 1850 treaties, Robinson-Huron and Robinson-Superior treaties. That the annuities that were set out were intended to escalate or to increase over time as the lands were used and resource revenue was generated. And so this had to go to court because there was no agreement by other government to say, yeah, let's talk about this. Let's deal with these treaty issues. And the litigation has been successful where the Canadian courts have recognized that the annuities should have been increasing over time. And now the fight is, what should be paid over now? It's still not over. But for Anishinaabe Nation, when we're talking about our treaty rights, you can see there's different approaches to exercising our rights. Could be through litigation by calling on governments to adhere to the provisions of the treaty. It could be just us exercising our rights under child, youth, and family well-being. Those are rights that were never ceded in treaty and never given away. Or we could negotiate for recognition of the exercise of our rights as well. But on the other side, we have the Government of Canada that we have to deal with. And the Government of Canada says that they have jurisdiction over Indians and lands reserved for Indians. And that's section 9124 of the Canadian Constitution. And with that, it's an asserted jurisdiction. From Anishinaabe perspective, because the Government of Canada says that they have jurisdiction, doesn't mean that it's true. It's an assertion. Anishinaabe, as I read to you, Nagodwanagas Anishinaabe, we already have jurisdiction over ourselves, and that was given to us by Creator as a people. And so Canada says that, well, we wrote in section 35 to protect your Aboriginal and treaty rights. But for the Government of Canada, the position is we only recognize those rights if you gain recognition through a successful litigation. You win in court and the court says you have these rights, then Canada will recognize them. Canada also takes the position that if you did go to court to get recognition, then you have to negotiate an agreement with us. And we have to agree that you have these rights in this jurisdiction. And again, that's not true. But that's what we have to face. So under the laws of Canada, they create legislation to govern Indians and lands reserved for Indians. We have the Indian Act, the First Nation Lands Management Act. There's lots of legislation. And there's also provincial legislation that applies as well. I'm going to stop sharing now. So when we're dealing with governments with respect to treaties, a lot of times we have to secure that recognition that, one, the treaty is real, and two, we have to go and prove our rights in courts, or we have to negotiate for those rights to be honored and recognized, which is a rather odd situation. But that's the world we're in, and that's why we have Treaties Recognition Week, to bring that information about the reality of the relationship between the First Peoples and the settler governments that have come, and even our approach to law and recognition of treaty rights. Very different. So that is my presentation, and I'm open to any questions that you might have.
Let me go ahead, Tracey. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Really nice slides to be able to see the work that you and others have been involved in with the Anishinaabe Nation. And last year, just for the group, we did have the 3 of the people involved in the annuities claim. So that recorded lecture is actually on our website as well. It was very informative. Hard to capture years of work in a one hour talk, but at least it was able to bring some important information to the forefront. So we do have a large number of people here who are listening, and we have opportunity if you would like to either put your hand up, or if you would like to put a question in the chat, question or comment for Tracey. We have a little bit of time, about 10 minutes to take some of those questions. And I can see the hands up if you want to go with the hands up option.
It's a very quiet group. Okay. Maybe because it's Monday.
I think it may be. Well, maybe I'll start then with one of the questions. So as you were speaking, you had really throughout the whole thread and the piece that you spoke in Anishinaabe, spoken about the inherent right to jurisdiction as I would say as a right, but as a concept as well, which is somewhat different perhaps than a Western or colonial construct of jurisdiction, where that right is usually reserved for a select few. How do you see or how have you experienced, even maybe more importantly, this negotiation or these discussions when working with the provincial and federal governments or other governments other than Anishinaabe governments?
Yeah. So if the inherent right to jurisdiction exists, it's real. It predates Confederation. It predates the treaties and the establishment of Canada and all those sorts of things. It comes, as I said, from that Anishinaabe. And the experience and the approach that we've taken with the government of Canada is not any different than other nations across Canada. So there are a number of negotiations with respect to both sectoral and comprehensive self-government agreements. There's modern day treaties that are being negotiated. A lot of treaties in British Columbia have been settled in recent years. Here in Ontario, the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan are settling their treaty. So the governments are open to negotiating treaties, but the government of Canada will say that the inherent right to jurisdiction exists and it is protected under Section 35 of the Charter, which is part of the Canadian Constitution. But the position is that those rights are only recognized if they're proven in court or negotiated into an agreement. There's no acceptance of the fact that the inherent rights are truly inherent. It's kind of like a silly situation where the government will say, yes, there are inherent rights. Yes, they do exist, but in essence, they're like in a cloud in the air. They only exist if they're drawn down or pulled down and recorded in written agreement, which is recognized under Canadian law or recognized by judges in a Canadian court. And so it's an odd situation, but that's the reality. And that's national, that's across the country. In the area of education, we've been working with Miikan, who have an education sectoral self-government agreement that's been in place for a number of years, but like 25 years, even longer than ours, which is only 5 years old. But they deal with the same issues that we're dealing with after all that period of time. We have First Nations that are in the late stages of their negotiations, Anishinaabe, Aski Nation, and Meadow Lake, First Nations in Saskatchewan, and they're facing the same issues that we are. Although there is a recognition of inherent rights, that the practice is you must negotiate them. And the oddest requirement is that you must negotiate them under the federal policy. With the province of Ontario as well, there's restrictions in the negotiations where we're restricted by provincial law and provincial policy. And our position is that your policies and your laws apply to you. And we have our own policies and we have our own laws. And every meeting before we negotiate or discuss anything with the governments of Canada, we recite the Anishinaabe as a reminder to them of who we are as a people and what it means to have inherent jurisdiction and what our responsibilities are. So when we're negotiating not just for the present, the here and now, we're negotiating from the past, the present, and into the future. So that's the reality we have to deal with. And it really underscores the importance of having educational sessions like this to open people's minds so that they can understand and they can know what their governments are doing, and they can take positions and they can support the true reconciliation of these treaty and Aboriginal rights, because it's all of our responsibility, no matter who we are and what positions we hold. No, I'm a mother. I have 3 children. It's my responsibility to share this Anishinaabe with my children, so they'll always know who they are and what their responsibilities are. As a lawyer, I take that responsibility to negotiations tables and into courts. Right? As a sister, I share that responsibility in working together with my siblings, my sisters, to do the work that we're doing individually. And so we all have responsibilities to make sure that we are advancing and reconciling the relationship that to now has been defined largely by government policy and, from Anishinaabe perspective, foreign laws.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was a good reminder of the fact that we walk in many different shoes through the course of our lives and our days. And so recognizing that throughout those different spaces, reconciliation does certainly, it changes as well as we work through that. We have a few notes in the chat here, which I'll just read. We have quite a few thank yous there. Just a reminder that the talk is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel on the main webpage at Lakehead University /Indigenous. From Marcy, very informative as always. And for educators that are on the Zoom today, you can find more information at anishinabek.ca /education resources. And from Donalda Delarond, just very informative. And just a note that Red Sky Métis Independent Nation was included in the 1850 treaty. So that is the chats that are up to date so far. We do have, and maybe because we are in an educational system, I do have, oh, Elder Jean's waving at me. Would you like to speak, Elder Jean?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I had a question for Tracey. You know, you talked about inherent right and jurisdiction. And my question is, you know, once you're registered in Canadian, on your birth certificate, do you lose jurisdiction of your identity, who you are, Anishinaabe, and that lessens your negotiating arguments?
Yeah, that's a good question. And this is a question that is discussed repeatedly. Because not only do our births get registered with the provincial government, and then you do your birth registration form, and then Ontario recognizes you, and then you get your Canadian citizenship because you're born in Ontario, and then you apply for your Indian status card, right? And so there's all these different layers of identity. But as Anishinaabe, we're born Anishinaabe. We're born who we are. And so we can have multiple identities, multiple identity cards even. Anishinaabe Nation at one point issued Anishinaabe passports as a nation. And so some of our leaders traveled on the Anishinaabe Nation passport. So we can have those multiple identities. It doesn't take away from our position at the negotiations table. It doesn't mean we're less than who we are when we sit there. And again, that's why that Nagorwa Anishinaabe is so important to us, as that reminder. So me, I'm registered as a lawyer, and I'm licensed to practice in the province of Ontario by the Law Society of Ontario. But I see myself not only as a lawyer who's licensed in Ontario, but I also see myself as an advocate for Anishinaabe Nation. And that recognition as being an advocate for Anishinaabe comes through the requests from the nation and from the First Nations to invite me to work with them together so that we can advance our inherent rights and the recognition of those rights. And that is very much as legitimate as the license being recognized within the nation as having that responsibility and being recognized for that role as an advocate. So we do have to carry those many roles and titles with us, but always remember who we are. And, just to give you an example, when after the Supreme Court of Canada released the decision in Blackwater versus Plitt, the main argument that we were making is that Indigenous peoples should be compensated for the whole bundle of harms that were suffered in residential school, that it was not possible to divide up the harms and say, we'll compensate you for physical and sexual abuse, but we're not going to compensate you for emotional or psychological abuse. We're not compensating you for your loss of language and culture and separation from family and community. And we were arguing that's impossible to pull that harm apart and say compensation for some harm, but not all of the harm. And when the decision was released and all the judges sat on that particular case, all 9 were present that day for the hearing of the case and writing the decision. And when the decision was released, there was no recognition of that compensation for all of the harms. And so as a lawyer, I thought, how could I continue to be an officer of the court for a court that has it all wrong, where the highest and the best legal minds can't see and didn't accept the argument in supporting compensation for all of the harms that were suffered. And I just about quit being a lawyer that day because I thought, I can't do this. This isn't right. And how could I stay in this system here that's doing wrong? But I was convinced otherwise by others who said, you'll need that license though to keep walking through the door, to keep talking to those judges and to keep telling our stories and advancing our claims and our cases. And so I was all ready to give that up because in my mind, that was a mistake they made. And I don't want to be part of this ongoing mistake, but I am. I'm still here and I still have my license to practice law, but I look at it from a little bit different way. And so, Jean, to get to the heart of your question, it's how do we define ourselves? How do those in our community see us? And that's more important than, you know, the Canadian passport or the Ontario issued birth certificate or the Indigenous Services Canada status card that some would have. Miigwech.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I think I can probably speak on behalf of the group and many others. We're glad that you made the decision to continue with your professional, your journey, so that you are in those circles and you are in those rooms and you are in those negotiations and those discussions. So thank you so much. So on behalf of everybody here today and those who weren't able to join us, but will certainly be watching this moving forward, I would like to extend, just a really deep thank you and a gratitude for sharing with us, not just the work that you do, but really the deep spiritual space that treaties have to, in particular, Anishinaabe Nation, but I think as First Nations people for sure, and Indigenous people throughout the country. And we have different relationships in our different spaces with treaties, depending on where we sit and how we identify, whether we're new to Canada or whether our families have been in Canada for many generations, or they've been here forever. So I think, just your reminder that, really it's important for every single person to have a deeper understanding and continually learn. This is an ongoing journey. You're probably one of the more knowledgeable people in our room here today, but certainly as we work through this, I think it's important for us all to have this opportunity to spend with you today. I would like to also I'm going to share my screen for a moment here, just so that you can see what's coming up this week. So we do have an event tomorrow for Indigenous Veterans Day from 1 to 2:30 p.m. in Thunder Bay. It will be in person, but it is also being streamed live. So if you can't attend Thunder Bay in person, you can certainly sign up and you can watch the webinar in real time. We do have our Indigenous Veterans Day exhibit again that has been put together with multiple communities, including the museum, Treaty 3, the Thunder Bay Museum, Red Sky Métis Nation, the Métis Nation of Ontario, and Fort William First Nation in our particular region here. So please join us if you're able to come. On Wednesday from 12 to 1, we have Sarah Mainville, a lot of lawyers this week, but she will be speaking as well on Thursday with a topic related to Treaty Week. And then on Wednesday and on Thursday morning, we have Jonathan Solomon, who is the former Mishkegowuk Grand Chief, speaking on Treaty 9 and the agreement that was orally agreed to back in 1905, 1906. So just with that, you can find those on our Lakehead University events page if you'd like to sign up if you have not had a chance to sign up yet. So to everyone that joined us today, Chimigwech, Marcy Cho, thank you so much for joining us. And again, Tracey, so glad to make your acquaintance, and we will definitely be keeping track of the very important work that you're doing with communities across this area. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Come on, Pete.